Welcome to High Scary Stories. Tonight, we hike deep into the Appalachian wilderness, where the paths vanish, where names echo through trees long after the voices are gone, and where cabins appear only when they want to be found. These are 8 true stories from the oldest mountains in America. Here, the forest doesn't hide what it is. It watches. It waits. And sometimes, it welcomes you with a smile. This is High Scary Stories. Let's begin. Story 1, The Plastic Room. It's been almost 15 years since that trip, and I still wake up some nights with the image of his smile burned into my memory. People say time makes you forget, that fear fades, but I've learned that some moments dig so deep into your bones that they never truly leave you. I don't share this story for sympathy. I share it because someone needs to hear it. Because not every danger in the woods growls or snaps twigs underfoot. Some wear friendly faces and offer to stay behind when you're sick. If there's one thing I wish someone had told me back then, it's this: never ignore the knot in your stomach. Never excuse the way someone makes your skin crawl just because everyone else seems to like them. I did, and it nearly cost me my life. What happened in that cabin changed everything. I was never the same again. His name was Robert, and he was part of a group of friends I had only recently become close with. It all started when I transferred to a new university during my sophomore year. I didn't know many people, and was grateful when Leah, my roommate, introduced me to her circle of friends. They were fun, outgoing, and always planning trips or little getaways. That summer, someone suggested a hiking trip to a cabin deep in the mountains. I'd never been an outdoorsy person, but the idea of spending a week surrounded by laughter and friendship sounded like something I desperately needed. There were 8 of us in total. Robert was always quiet, the kind of guy who blended into the background. He wasn't charming or loud like the others, but he was polite, helpful, and often smiled without saying much. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Leah told me he had been on previous trips with the group and was just the quiet type. The cabin itself was stunning, remote, rustic, surrounded by tall trees that swallowed up the sun by early evening. We laughed around the fire, cooked meals together, and hiked during the day. Everything felt perfect, at least it seemed that way. By the second day, I started feeling off. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a headache, a bit of nausea, and a strange chill I couldn't shake. I assumed it was just the altitude, or maybe I hadn't drunk enough water on the hike. That morning, while everyone packed up their gear for a longer trail deeper into the mountains, I told them I might stay behind to rest. Leah was concerned and offered to stay with me, but I insisted she go. I didn't want to be the reason she missed out. That's when Robert spoke up. He said he wasn't feeling 100% either, and thought it might be smart to sit this one out too. There was a pause. No one questioned it. Leah looked at me unsure, but I forced a smile and said I'd be fine. The others left with sleeping bags and food for the overnight hike. The moment they disappeared down the trail, the silence around the cabin felt heavier. I was alone with Robert, and for reasons I couldn't explain, something inside me began to feel uneasy. At first, everything seemed normal. Robert helped clean up the dishes from breakfast and even offered to make tea, though I declined. But as the hours passed, I began noticing small things that unsettled me. He kept watching me, not obviously, but out of the corner of his eye, like he was studying me. Whenever I looked up, he'd glance away quickly and smile too quickly. Once I caught him staring through the window at the trail where the others had gone, not moving, not blinking, just staring for minutes. I tried to shake it off. Maybe he was just awkward. Maybe I was just tired and reading into things. But then I noticed how he kept asking me if I felt better, the same question over and over, as if waiting for a specific answer. The worst moment came when I walked past his room and saw something strange. A small notebook sat open on his bed. On the page were sketches, drawings of a woman's face that looked disturbingly like mine. I froze, heart pounding, then hurried away before he noticed. I told myself it was coincidence, but deep down I knew better. Something wasn't right, and I had just one night to survive. That night I couldn't sleep. I stayed in bed fully dressed, every nerve in my body alert. Around 2 a.m., I heard the first knock, soft, deliberate, on my bedroom door. My heart jumped. Robert's voice followed, calm and casual, asking if I had any painkillers. I swallowed hard and told him there was a first aid kit in the kitchen. Silence. Then footsteps retreating. I sat frozen, listening. 30 minutes later, another knock. This time his voice was lower, less friendly. He said the medicine hadn't worked and asked for something stronger. I reminded him he shouldn't mix pills so soon. Silence again, but it lingered longer. I held my breath. Then, without warning, he knocked harder and said I was being rude, that he just needed help. His tone had changed, aggressive, demanding. That's when I got up and quietly locked the door hands, shaking. I backed away, clutching my phone, though there was no signal. His shadow passed under the doorframe. Another knock, louder this time, almost a bang. I realized then he wasn't trying to get help. He was trying to get in. I stayed still, my eyes locked on the doorknob, praying it wouldn't turn. But deep down, I knew he wasn't done. The knocking stopped around 3 a.m., but I didn't dare move. Minutes dragged like hours. Then I heard it, the faint creak of floorboards, moving away from my door, slow and deliberate. I pressed my ear to the wood and waited. Silence. I knew I couldn't stay. If Robert truly meant to hurt me, a locked door wouldn't stop him forever. I grabbed my shoes, my jacket, and stuffed my phone, a flashlight, and a pocket knife into my backpack. Then quietly, I opened the window. The cold air hit me like a slap, but I didn't hesitate. I slid out into the darkness and ran. I didn't stop until the cabin was out of sight. I moved deeper into the trees, guided only by the moonlight and fear. Eventually, I stumbled upon a clearing, and what I saw there made my blood run cold. In the middle of the clearing were bones. Animal maybe, but too many. Arranged in strange patterns, ropes hung from branches like makeshift restraints, some frayed and stained. I found a small tarp, partially buried under leaves. Beneath it were old clothes, women's clothes, and a faded photo. The girl in the photo had the same necklace I was wearing. My stomach turned. Suddenly, every look Robert had given me made sense. He had been here before. This wasn't a spontaneous trip for him. This place was his. My only thought was to get as far from that clearing as possible before daylight came. Because now I knew he hadn't planned to let me leave. At sunrise, I finally reached the gravel road near the base of the mountain. A passing ranger spotted me, stumbling along the edge, bruised, cold, and barely able to speak. I was rushed to a local clinic, dehydrated and in shock. It wasn't until later that I told them everything. The police went back up with a search team, and what they found confirmed my worst fears. The cabin was empty, Robert gone. But his backpack was still there. Inside, they found a camera, a small black camcorder. Most of the files were locked or corrupted, but the text recovered enough to make my skin crawl. Dozens of video clips, all of me. Sleeping, brushing my hair, sitting alone on the porch, from angles I never saw him take. Some clips were dated before the trip even began. There was one where I was lying in bed, and the door was clearly cracked open, the camera slowly zooming in on my face. I had never even stirred. It wasn't just creepy. It was calculated. The officers tried to track Robert, but it was like he vanished. No ID matches, no prints, nothing. He had erased himself. But he left behind that camera, and the proof that I had been watched for a very long time. Months later, after trying to rebuild some sense of normal, I moved into a new apartment in a different city under a new number and a different last name. One evening, while unpacking boxes in my new bedroom, I found something that didn't belong, a small envelope tucked beneath my pillow. Inside was a single Polaroid. It was a photo of me sleeping in my new bed. Scrawled in black ink on the bottom were 4 words, "You still look peaceful." My scream caught in my throat. He hadn't disappeared. He had just started over. And somehow, he had found me again. Story 2. The Makeshift Camp. I went into the woods that weekend to clear my head. After the breakup, after losing my job, and after months of feeling like a shell of myself, I figured a few days alone on the trail might help me breathe again. Hiking had always been my escape, a way to reconnect with something real when life became too loud. The Appalachian Trail had called to me for years, but I had never gone this deep before. I chose a lesser-known path far from tourist spots, where I could walk for hours without seeing another soul. That was the point. Solitude, silence, space to think. The morning I set out, the air was crisp, the sky cloudless. I felt hopeful for the first time in weeks. Just me, a map, my pack, and the long trail ahead. I had no idea what I would find out there. I never imagined something would find me first. The first few miles were everything I hoped they would be. The forest was dense but alive, with soundbirds calling overhead, leaves rustling underfoot, and the soft trickle of a nearby creek. Sunlight broke through the canopy in golden streaks, and for a while, I let myself believe this trip might actually help. But somewhere around the 3rd hour, that peace began to shift. I can't explain it logically. Nothing changed in the terrain. The sun was still out, but I began to feel watched. At first, I brushed it off. It's common, I told myself. When you're alone in the woods, your mind plays tricks. Every snap of a twig or flutter of wings becomes something sinister if you let it. Still, the feeling lingered. I'd pause, and it was like the woods paused with me. When I moved, I swore I heard footsteps that didn't match mine. Faint, measured, keeping distance. I spun around more than once, heart pounding, but saw nothing but trees, no animals, no wind, just that heavy silence pressing in. It wasn't just imagination. Something was there, and it was patient. Not revealing itself, not yet. Just letting me know I wasn't really alone. By early afternoon, I came across a narrow offshoot from the trail. It was barely noticeable, like a deer path swallowed by underbrush. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to stay on the marked route, but curiosity got the better of me. I pushed through the brush and followed the faint path for maybe 10 minutes before I stumbled into a small clearing. That's when I saw it. A makeshift camp. Not some abandoned hunter's shelter or forgotten ranger station. This was active. A blue tarp was tied between 2 trees for shade. A ring of stones marked a cold fire pit. Several cans of food sat in a pile near a rusty backpack. At first, it looked like someone had just stepped away. But then I noticed the details. Coiled rope laid neatly beside a hunting knife stabbed into a log. Duct tape. A tattered sleeping bag stained with something dark. But what made my stomach drop was the small pile of photographs. I picked one up with a trembling hand. It showed a woman late 20s, maybe, sitting by a stream, unaware she was being photographed. The next photo showed her asleep in a tent. Then another, a man walking alone through a clearing. Each picture felt invasive, stolen without consent. That's when I found the last photo in the pile. My photo, taken that morning. I was tying my boot back to the trail completely unaware. My knees buckled. Someone had been following me. Not just today, not just once. They had planned for this, and I had walked straight into their den. I stared at the photo in my hands, my breath caught in my throat. There was no mistaking it. It was me kneeling near a fallen log, tying my bootlaces. The timestamp on the corner showed it had been taken just after sunrise that very morning. The angle was high, like from a ridge or tree, and far enough away that I never would have noticed. But there I was, completely unaware, exposed. I looked around the clearing, heart pounding, trying to imagine where the shot had been taken from. My skin crawled as I realized how long they must have been tracking me. This wasn't random. I wasn't unlucky. I had been chosen, followed, documented. Something deep inside me snapped into survival mode. I dropped the photos, grabbed my pack, and backed out of the camp, careful not to make a sound. I needed to leave, fast. Because if they had watched me that morning, I had no doubt they were watching me now. I turned and moved as quickly as I could, without breaking into a full sprint, forcing myself to stay quiet, even though every nerve screamed for me to run. The trees closed in tighter branches, clawing at my arms as I retraced my steps toward the main trail. But the moment I thought I was in the clear, I heard footsteps. Not mine. Heavy, deliberate following. My breath hitched. I ducked low behind a fallen tree heart thundering in my chest and waited. The footsteps grew louder, then paused. I held my breath. Whoever it was, they were close enough that I could hear them breathing, slow and steady. Then a voice, soft and too calm, drifted through the trees. I couldn't make out the words, but it was enough to send a chill through my bones. I stayed hidden until the sound faded, then bolted in the opposite direction, no longer caring about noise. I ran blindly, driven by sheer panic, crashing through brush and leaping over roots. All I could think about was putting distance between me and that clearing, between me and whoever had been watching me. I didn't stop until my legs gave out beneath me, but I knew they hadn't stopped either. Just as the sun began to dip behind the treetops, I stumbled back onto the main trail, gasping for breath, scraped and trembling. I had no idea how far I had run or in what direction, but the sight of a weathered signpost gave me a flicker of hope. And then, as if the forest itself had relented, I saw him, a park ranger, walking slowly toward me. I waved, nearly collapsing from relief. When I reached him, I tried to explain everything at once: the camp, the photos, the footsteps, the voice, but my words came out in gasps. His calm expression shifted to concern. He radioed for backup and led me back down the trail toward where I said the camp had been. It took us nearly an hour to retrace the path, but when we finally arrived at the clearing, my stomach dropped. It was empty. No tarp, no fire pit, no photos, no ropes, nothing. Just undisturbed forest floor like no one had ever been there. I kept insisting, pointing to the spot where the knife had been lodged, the photos stacked, but it was all gone. The ranger tried to reassure me, but I saw it in his eyes. He didn't believe me. Not really. Back at the ranger station, one of the older officers pulled me aside while the others filed their reports. He spoke in a low voice, almost like he didn't want the others to hear. He said that every year, just one person reports finding a camp like the one I described. Same signs, Same feeling of being watched. But no two people ever find it twice. Search teams always come up empty. It's like the camp appears only long enough for one witness, then it vanishes. He looked me in the eye and said, "You weren't the first, but you were lucky enough to leave." Story 3. Shortcut to nowhere. After my younger brother died in a car accident, everything in my world felt fake. Conversations were hollow work, felt pointless, and I couldn't sleep through the night without waking up in a panic. I needed to get away from the noise, the condolences, the empty words people offered when they didn't know what else to say. So I packed a bag and drove to the Appalachian Trail, hoping that a few days alone in the woods might quiet the ache in my chest. It wasn't about healing, not really. I just wanted to feel something real again. Cold air, tired legs, the sound of wind in the trees. I chose a long stretch of trail I'd never hiked before. It was off-season, meaning fewer people and fewer distractions. That's exactly what I wanted. Just me in the silence. I thought nature might help me grieve. But out there I learned the woods have a silence of their own, and it doesn't always bring peace. On my second night out, I had a dream so vivid, it jolted me awake in a cold sweat. In it, I was still inside my tent just like in real life. But something felt wrong. The air was thick and unmoving. I tried to unzip the tent, but the zipper wouldn't budge. I kept pulling, yanking, but the flap refused to open. From outside, I heard footsteps circling slow and steady, dragging something heavy through the dirt. I called out, but no sound came from my mouth. Then I saw a shadow lean in, pressing against the fabric from the outside. I snapped awake, heart pounding, the zipper right beside me, untouched. I told myself it was stress, nothing more. But the next night it happened again. Same dream, same silence, same figure outside. And every time I woke up, it felt less like a dream and more like a memory trying to surface something I wasn't ready to face. The next day I tried to shake it off. I hiked for hours, letting the burn in my legs and the rhythm of my steps distract me. But that feeling, the sense of being watched, only grew stronger. It was subtle at first, like catching movement in the corner of your eye that vanishes when you turn your head. The forest felt too quiet. No bird song, no wind, just the crunch of my boots and something else behind me. I stopped. The sound stopped. I moved again, and it followed. By late afternoon, I was on edge, jumping at every branch, crack, every rustle of leaves. That's when I heard it. A voice, faint and dry like wind, slipping through pine needles. It whispered my name. Not once, but again and again. Quiet, beckoning. I spun around, scanning the trees. No one. I called out, but the woods gave no answer. I told myself I was imagining things. The grief does strange things to the brain. But when I sat down to rest and opened my water bottle, I heard it again, closer this time, more insistent. My name barely audible, as if it were being breathed just inches from my ear. That was the moment I stopped believing I was alone. As the whispers faded into the stillness, I checked my map and realized I had wandered farther than I planned. I needed to head back before dusk, but the trail ahead curved sharply away from where I thought my camp was. That's when I remembered a shortcut I'd read about online, an old logging path that supposedly cut through the ridge and rejoined the main trail half a mile down. I found the overgrown break in the brush and stepped off the marked path. At first, it felt like progress. The terrain was steep but manageable, and I moved quickly, eager to put distance between me and whatever had whispered my name. But the deeper I went, the less familiar everything became. The trees grew denser and the light dimmed far too early. Every landmark I expected, streams, fallen logs, a large rock formation, was missing. I checked my compass, but it spun in slow, confused circles. That was when the fear settled in. I wasn't on a shortcut. I was somewhere else entirely. The forest around me felt different now, older, heavier, like it had closed behind me. I kept walking, hoping to find the trail again. But every step only pulled me further into the unknown. Night fell faster than I expected. One moment the trees were casting long shadows, and the next the forest was drowned in blackness, so complete I couldn't see my own hands. My flashlight flickered, then died without warning, though the batteries were new that morning. I was forced to rely on the weak glow of my phone, but even that seemed to barely cut through the darkness. The silence pressed in on me like a weight, broken only by the sound of my own breathing, till I heard the footsteps again. Soft at first, then closer, more deliberate. I spun around, phone held high, but saw nothing. Just trees. Then came the whispers. Not just one voice this time. Several. All low, all rasping, overlapping in a language I didn't recognize. They swirled around me close enough that I could feel breath on the back of my neck. I shouted, but the sound fell flat, as if the forest swallowed it whole. The air grew colder, though there was no wind. I backed against a tree, clutching my pack like it could protect me, heart pounding so loud it drowned everything else out. Then the voices stopped. The footsteps, too. Only the silence remained deeper than before, almost waiting. I didn't move for what felt like hours. I was too afraid. Not just of what I couldn't see, but of the certainty blooming inside me that something was out there. And it wasn't lost. It was hunting. And I had walked straight into its path. When the sky finally began to lighten, I was still standing beneath that same tree body, stiff from fear and cold. As soon as I had the nerve, I powered on my phone. The battery was low, but the GPS still worked barely. I opened the app, praying for a signal, for some sense of direction. What I saw made my stomach turn. The GPS track showed a jagged circle. I had been walking for hours through dense brush, uneven terrain, in absolute darkness, and somehow ended up in the exact same place I had started. 7 hours of movement. 0 progress. My mind raced for explanations. Maybe I had doubled back without realizing. Maybe I was disoriented. But deep down, I knew better. I had followed the compass, trusted my instincts, and yet the woods had folded around me like a maze. Something had kept me trapped, not by walls or cliffs, by something else. I stared at the blue trail on the screen, looping endlessly like I was a toy circling a drain. The moment I looked up from my phone, I heard it again, a voice. My name, soft, familiar. Only this time it came from ahead of me. Exactly where I had already been. When I was finally rescued 2 days later, dehydrated and half delirious, I told a park official everything. He listened silently, then asked a strange question. Had anyone ever called my name? I nodded, still shaken. He left the room and returned with an old missing person flyer. The man in the photo looked eerily familiar. His name was Daniel Harper. Vanished in 1983 while hiking the same ridge. No trace was ever found. My blood ran cold. Because the voice I'd heard in the woods, then the one that whispered my name in the dark, was the exact voice from my dreams. And it wasn't mine. Story 4. The Shelter Man. There were 4 of us that weekend. Me, Ryan, Joel, and Marcus. We'd been friends since high school, and every year we took a trip to challenge ourselves, something physical, something wild. That year we picked a stretch of the Appalachian Trail none of us had hiked before. Remote, rugged, and surrounded by stories. We didn't believe in any of the old legends, of course. Missing hikers, strange lights, whispers in the woods. We laughed those off. For us, it was about pushing our limits, getting off the grid, and proving we could handle ourselves. We packed light but smart tents, food maps, knives, and just enough arrogance to make us think we were invincible. The plan was a 3-day loop, camping the second night in one of the old stone shelters scattered along the trail. It was supposed to be simple. Cold, dirty, but simple. We had no idea what waited for us out there, and none of us were prepared for the man we'd meet by the fire. By the time we reached the shelter, the sun was dipping low, and the forest had taken on that deep hush it gets right before nightfall. We were exhausted, sore, and looking forward to resting our legs. From a distance, we could already see the faint flicker of firelight through the trees. At first, we were relieved someone else was already there, which meant safety in numbers. But as we approached, something felt off. The fire wasn't its usual orange and red. It burned blue, casting strange shadows that danced along the stone walls of the shelter. And sitting just beside it was a man. Alone. His back was hunched, face turned slightly toward his eyes, reflecting the unnatural glow of the flame. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He just watched as we walked up and set our gear down a few feet away. His clothes were worn mismatched layers of flannel and wool. His hands were dirty fingernails, black with soil or something worse. The strangest part was how still he was, not like someone resting, more like someone waiting. Ryan nudged me and whispered that we should keep our distance. I nodded. Something in the air had shifted, and we had walked straight into it. We tried to act normal, setting up our sleeping bags and boiling water for our dehydrated meals. The man didn't move, just stared into the blue flames like they were speaking to him. After a while, Joel offered him a packet of food. He took it without saying thanks, tore it open with his teeth, and ate in silence. Then suddenly he spoke. His voice was low and rough, like dry leaves dragging across the ground. "They live in the trees," he muttered. "They watch, they listen, but they don't belong." We exchanged confused glances, unsure if he was talking to us or the fire. Marcus asked who he meant. The man looked up, eyes gleaming unnaturally. "The ones who took my brother," he said. "Filthy things, pretending to be people. But I see them. I see what they really are." His hands trembled slightly, but his voice grew steadier. "I come out here to hunt them now. Give them what they gave him." No one said a word. The fire cracked. He smiled faintly, but it wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile that says that he's seen something terrible and maybe done something worse. That night, none of us slept easy. The moment the sun rose, we quietly agreed to leave the shelter early. None of us wanted to stay another minute near that man. He hadn't slept at all, just sat there sharpening a long knife with slow, steady strokes, eyes fixed on something we couldn't see. As we packed our gear, he didn't say a word, but his silence felt louder than anything else. We slipped away down the trail, trying not to make noise. About 20 minutes in, I glanced over my shoulder and stopped cold. Off to the right, barely visible between the trees, was a figure. Not the man from the shelter. Someone else. Standing perfectly still, half-shadowed by the woods. Just watching. I called out. No response. Then another shape moved behind him. We didn't wait to see more. We broke into a fast hike, hearts pounding, eyes scanning every shadow. Something was wrong with those woods, and it wasn't just the man. A few months later, after the initial fear had dulled and our lives returned to their usual routines, Joel suggested we go back. He said we'd overreacted, that maybe the man was just mentally unwell, not dangerous. Curiosity got the better of us. We packed lightly, brought extra flashlights, and made our way to the same shelter. But when we arrived, the place was gone. Nothing remained but blackened earth and the crumbled stone outline of what used to be the walls. Everything else was ash. In the center of the ruins, half buried in soot and charred debris, we found bones. Not one clean skeleton, but fragments burnt, broken, scattered. Ryan threw up in the bushes. Marcus just stared pale and shaking. We reported what we found to the nearest ranger station. They came out, marked the area off, and asked us questions we couldn't answer. No one ever confirmed if the bones were human. But the look on the ranger's face said enough. As we left, Joel lagged behind, taking one last photo. That night he texted us. In the background of the image, just beyond the tree line, stood the man. Same clothes, same face, watching, smiling, and very much alive. We returned to the ranger station the next morning, photo in hand, shaken and demanding answers. The ranger we spoke to the day before was gone, replaced by an older man with tired eyes and a tone far too calm for what we were telling him. When Joel showed him the picture, he barely glanced at it before sighing and folding his hands on the desk. That shelter burned down years ago, he said flatly. Old lightning strike. No one's used it in a long time. We pushed back, told him we had been there just months ago, that we'd spoken with someone, seen things. He didn't flinch. Probably kids squatting, he said. People see all sorts of things in the woods when they're tired or scared. Nothing to worry about. But we knew he was lying. His eyes kept flicking toward the photo, then away, like he recognized something but refused to say it. When we pressed harder, he stood up and walked us to the door. Best to leave it alone, he said quietly. Some places don't want to be found. Let them stay lost. It was clear the conversation was over, and that whatever we had seen, we weren't the first. A week later, Joel sent the photo of the fire to a friend who worked in fire forensics. She analyzed the color and intensity, curious about the strange blue flames we had all witnessed. Her response was brief, but chilling. No common chemical fuel or natural element would burn that shade in open air, not without something unnatural present. She asked where the fire took place, but Joel never answered. He deleted the photo and blocked her number. We haven't spoken about it since. But sometimes late at night, I still see that color in my dreams. Cold, blue, and alive. Story 5. Juliana's Song. I had always loved the mountains, so when I bought a small cabin deep in the Appalachians, it became my personal retreat from the world. Every summer, my brother would send his 2 kids, Eli 10 and Noah 5, to stay with me for a few days. It was our little tradition. They called me the cool uncle, mostly because I let them roast too many marshmallows and stay up late watching old monster movies. That summer, the air was thick with heat, and the woods around the cabin buzzed with the hum of cicadas. The boys played on the porch while I fixed up a loose shutter and kept an eye on the sky, watching clouds gather over the ridge. It felt peaceful in that simple, quiet way only the forest can offer. I never imagined those woods, so familiar and safe, would turn into something I didn't recognize. Something ancient. Something watching. And it all started when Noah asked, completely serious, if his new friend Juliana could come play too. At first, I thought Noah was just playing pretend like most 5-year-olds do. He was sitting cross-legged in the yard, whispering and giggling to himself, while Eli chased fireflies nearby. When I asked who he was talking to, he looked up and said very matter-of-factly, "Juliana, she lives in the woods." I smiled, thinking it was cute, but something in his tone made me pause. It wasn't playful. It was calm, certain. I asked where he met her, and he said she came to the edge of the trees the night before while he was looking for frogs. She had long black hair and a white dress, and she told him she used to live here a long time ago. Then, as if it were the most normal thing in the world, he added, "She wants to play with me tonight, but only if you say it's okay." My skin prickled. There was something off. Something too precise in the way he described her. That night after dinner, as the sky darkened and the trees melted into shadow, Noah tugged on my sleeve and asked if we could go into the woods to find Juliana. I laughed at first, thinking he was still playing, but he looked up at me with those serious eyes kids get when they truly believe something. "She said she'd come back tonight," he whispered. "But maybe she's lost. We have to help her." I glanced over at Eli, who just shrugged and said he hadn't seen anyone. I hesitated. The forest at night wasn't a place I liked to wander, even as an adult. There's a certain weight in those woods after dark, a silence that doesn't feel empty, but expectant. I told Noah gently that it was too late to go exploring, and that if Juliana wanted to play, she could come to the porch like before. His expression didn't change. "She said she can't come to the porch. You have to come to her." That sentence lodged itself deep in my chest. I couldn't explain why, but it filled me with unease. This wasn't just imagination. Something in his voice felt rehearsed, like he was repeating words that weren't his. Later that night, after the boys had fallen asleep, I sat on the back porch with a book and a cup of tea, trying to shake the tension Noah's words had left behind. The forest was still but not quiet. Crickets chirped, branches creaked in the distance. And just past midnight, I heard it, a soft, humming, faint, but unmistakably a child's voice. My breath caught. I stood slowly and stepped off the porch, squinting into the dark. That's when I saw her. A little girl, maybe 5 or 6, standing between 2 trees at the edge of the woods. Pale dress, long dark hair, just like Noah described. She was facing away from me, swaying gently as she hummed. I called out, asking if she was okay, but she didn't respond. Instead, she turned slightly, just enough for me to see one eye glinting in the moonlight. Then she darted into the woods. Without thinking, I grabbed my flashlight and followed. The trees closed in quickly, the darkness thick, but I kept moving branches, whipping my arms, boots crunching dead leaves. I wasn't scared yet. Not really. I just didn't want a child wandering alone in the forest. I didn't realize I had walked straight into a trap. I had barely gone 100 yards into the woods when my phone vibrated in my pocket. Surprised I even had service, I pulled it out and saw an unknown number calling. On instinct, I answered. A calm voice identified itself as a local sheriff's deputy. He said there had been an emergency call from my address, something about a break-in. I froze. "I'm at the house," I said. "I mean just behind it in the woods." The line went quiet for a beat. Then he said, "Sir, we have an officer at your cabin right now. The back door was kicked in. The children are safe. But we need you to return immediately." My stomach dropped. I turned around, shining my light through the trees, suddenly aware of how far I'd wandered. The girl was gone. No humming, no movement, just silence. Panic set in. I started running back, tripping over roots. My only thought was, of the boys, were they really safe? Who had called the police? Had the girl been a distraction? It didn't feel like coincidence. The timing was too perfect. And if someone had broken in while I was being lured into the woods, then whatever was outside had never been the real threat. I reached the tree line just as the flashing lights of a police cruiser lit up the yard. 2 officers were standing near the back steps, weapons lowered but tense. One of them turned as I stumbled into view, breathless, covered in sweat and leaves. "You're the uncle?" he asked. I nodded, unable to speak. "The kids are inside," he said. Shaken, but okay. I pushed past him into the cabin. The sight stopped me cold. The back door had been torn open, not just kicked in, but splintered, as if something had slammed into it over and over. Mud streaked across the floor in long smears, and the walls were covered in deep scratches. Not knife marks, claw marks. The kind that gouged into the wood and peeled it back in thick curls. Eli sat on the couch, arms around his little brother, who was sobbing uncontrollably. "He was outside," Eli whispered when I crouched beside them. We saw his face in the window. He smiled and told us to open the door. I looked at the shattered frame, the scratches, the mud. There were no footprints, no sign of where he'd gone. But I knew this hadn't been random. I had been drawn out. The boys had been left defenseless. And if the police hadn't arrived when they did, I don't want to imagine what we would have found instead. Whatever Juliana was, she wasn't alone, and she had never wanted to play. She wanted the door unlocked. A few days later, still rattled and searching for answers, I stopped by a small local library in town. I mentioned the name Juliana to the librarian, and her expression changed instantly. She disappeared into the back and returned with an old crumbling book of Appalachian folklore. Inside was a section titled Children of the Hollow, and beneath it, lyrics to a lullaby. I read the first few lines out loud and froze. It was the exact song I had heard that night in the woods. Same melody, same words. The caption below read, "Sung by the lost girl of Cold Hollow, died 1871. Story 6, Basement Room 13. It was supposed to be a fun weekend. Just 6 of us girls crashing at Denise's house while her parents were away. We had snacks, cheap wine, horror movies queued up, and plans to stay up all night talking about everything and nothing. Denise's place was big and a little old, with creaky floors and a long basement hallway that always gave off weird vibes. But we didn't care. It was just part of the charm. By midnight, the living room was a mess of blankets and half-eaten pizza. Someone suggested Bloody Mary, and we all laughed, pretending not to be nervous. Music played low from someone's phone, and the lights were dimmed just enough to give everything a soft glow. It felt safe, warm, like nothing bad could reach us. We didn't know yet that something already had. Something waiting, watching, and it was going to change everything before the night was over. Around 1 a.m, Denise went to the kitchen to grab more chips. She came back pale, her voice shaky, and said someone had been looking through the window. At first, we thought she was joking or trying to scare us, but she wasn't the type. Her hands were trembling. She said she saw a man's face just for a second pressed up against the glass near the back door. We all rushed over, but whoever it was had already vanished. Still, the mood shifted immediately. What had felt fun and carefree turned tense. Olivia, always the most practical, grabbed her phone and called the police. Just in case, she said. We're not going to be the girls in the horror movie who ignore it. The dispatcher promised to send someone to check the property. While we waited, we locked every door and window, turned off the music, and tried to act like we weren't scared. But we were. Deep down, we all knew Denise hadn't imagined it. Someone had been watching us. And we had just invited the police into something far stranger than they expected. The police hadn't arrived yet when the lights went out. 1 second, the living room was dimly lit. The next, we were sitting in total darkness. We froze, unsure if it was a blown fuse or something worse. Then from the back of the house, we heard a loud crash, glass shattering. Someone screamed. Panic took over. We grabbed our phones for light and bolted down the hallway. Denise shouted for everyone to head to the basement. Her dad had reinforced the old wine room down there last year, and it had a heavy steel door with a lock. It was the only place in the house that felt remotely safe. We stumbled down the stairs, our breaths loud and ragged. As we reached the bottom, another window shattered upstairs. Footsteps thudded above us, multiple sets. They were inside. We piled into the wine room and slammed the doors shut, locking it from the inside. The walls were thick stone, no windows, no way in but through the door. It felt like a tomb. In the pitch black, someone whispered, "They're in the house." None of us answered. We knew. We could hear them laughing, calling out to us. They weren't in a hurry. They knew exactly where we were. As the noises outside grew louder, footsteps circling the basement, something heavy dragging across the floor above. We stayed huddled in the wine room, clutching each other in the dark. One of us finally turned on a flashlight. That's when we saw it. The walls. At first, they looked like old stains, patches of dark discoloration on the stone. But when we looked closer, our stomachs dropped. They weren't stains, they were names. Dozens of them carved into the stone and smeared over in dried, faded blood. First names, some with dates next to them, others with only initials. One of the names matched a girl from the area who had gone missing in 1997. Another name made Olivia gasp. It was her cousin's. She had disappeared 3 years ago while hiking alone. Nobody had ever connected the dots. Nobody had even thought to look. Now we were trapped in a room that felt less like a shelter and more like a shrine. A record. A list. One of us said it out loud, the thing we were all thinking. This isn't the first time. And then, softly from outside the door, a man's voice replied, amused and slow, "No. And it won't be the last." The laughter started as a low murmur and then rose into full guttural chuckles just beyond the heavy door. We heard footsteps, pacing boots, scraping against the concrete. And then a sharp knock, followed by another louder, like a fist slamming against the steel. A voice called out, sickeningly cheerful, "Come on, girls. Don't make this boring." Another man joined in, mimicking a whimper, like he was mocking someone crying. We stayed silent, too terrified to move or speak. Then the pounding began. Fists, feet, maybe even tools slamming into the door, over and over, the sound echoing off the stone walls like a war drum. One of them yelled, "Open up or we'll peel the lock off like skin." Denise clutched my arm so tightly, I thought she might draw blood. Olivia was shaking uncontrollably, lips pressed shut, eyes wide. Then came another bang, closer, heavier, and the unmistakable sound of something metal being dragged along the doorframe. "This place has taken plenty," a voice said, softer now, almost gentle. "It'll take you too." The scratching stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. And we knew in our bones that if that lock gave out, we wouldn't leave that basement alive. Just when the door handle began to rattle violently and one of the hinges gave a sickening groan, a blinding light cut through the narrow basement window, followed by the sharp command of a voice shouting, "Police! Come out with your hands up!" The pounding on the door ceased instantly. We heard scrambling above the rush of boots, retreating curses flung in panic. Then silence. Nothing but our heavy breathing. Moments later, the basement door creaked open and a beam of flashlight swept down the stairs. An officer called out, and Denise managed to unlock the wine room door with trembling hands. We spilled out pale and shaken, barely able to speak. Outside, police cars lit up the front yard, and 2 men, strangers, were already face down in cuffs. A third had escaped into the woods. We never saw his face. An officer later told us the men had been using abandoned tunnels under the neighborhood, accessing old service lines that ran right beneath Denise's home. They'd been watching for days, waiting. We were inches from becoming names carved into that stone wall. And we only survived because someone had bothered to call the police in time. The next day, while police searched the basement more thoroughly, one of the officers called Denise over. Taped behind a loose brick in the wine room was a piece of yellowed paper scrawled in smeared red ink. It read, "Room 13, always needs new names. Always needs new. You locked us out. But we'll find a way back in." None of us spoke. The police treated it as a sick joke left behind by the men they caught. But we knew better. There were 3 voices that night, and only 2 were arrested. The third one, the one that whispered, hadn't needed the door at all. Story 7. The Screaming Cabin. I went hiking into the northern woods alone, looking for something I couldn't quite name. Maybe peace, maybe answers. A month earlier, I'd started dreaming about a cabin. Always the same log walls, one window glowing faintly and distant screaming just as I turned to walk away. I'm not a superstitious person, but the dream left a mark. So I followed it. I packed light, took my journal, and headed into a stretch of forest known for old ghost stories and strange silences. Locals called it Dead Man's Hollow, though no one could say why. I told myself I just needed time off the grid. But the truth was, something deeper had called me there. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. Even the birds didn't seem to sing in some places. And by the second day, I began to feel it like I was being guided. Not lost, just nudged. As if something wanted me to find that cabin. On the 3rd afternoon, as I followed a narrow deer trail beneath a line of black pines, I heard it a scream, sharp and distant, echoing through the trees. I froze. It wasn't the shriek of an animal or the whoop of some bird. It was human, a woman. I called out, but no one answered. The air felt heavier suddenly, like the forest was holding its breath. I moved toward the sound, heart pounding, stepping over twisted roots and damp moss. After about 10 minutes, I saw it. The cabin from my dreams. Exactly as I remembered, aged logs, crooked roof, one window glowing faintly with warm light despite the deepening dusk. I approached slowly, every instinct telling me to turn around. But the scream came again, closer this time. And then a face appeared in the window. A woman. Pale, wide-eyed, mouthing the word "help" before disappearing behind the curtain. I ran to the front door, found it slightly ajar, and pushed inside. The cabin smelled of ash and rot. No sound. No woman. Just a fireplace burning low and a trail of wet footprints leading down into the floorboards. That was when I noticed the screaming hadn't stopped. It was just quieter. Closer. As I stood frozen near the doorway, trying to make sense of the strange footprints and that flickering fire, I heard the floorboards creak behind me. I spun around, and there he was. A man in his 50s, face weathered like old bark, holding a shotgun casually across his chest. He wore a ranger's coat, but there was no badge, no name. His eyes, though, were sharp and unwavering. "You need to leave," he said flatly, voice low like gravel. I started to stammer something about the woman, about the screaming, but he stepped forward and cut me off. "There's no one here but you and me. If you heard something, you leave it here." The way he said it, it wasn't a threat. It was a rule, an old one. I looked toward the fireplace. the footprints then back at him. "Seriously, get out," he said again, firmer now. "People disappear around this cabin, especially the ones who stay too long." I backed away slowly, heart thudding. Just before I stepped out the door, I glanced at the window one last time. The woman was back, standing behind the glass. This time she wasn't mouthing help, she was mouthing run. I didn't stop moving until I was back at the trailhead, lungs burning, mind spinning. I used the weak signal on my phone to call the local sheriff's office. I told them everything: the screams, the woman in the window, the man with the gun. They told me to stay put and sent a patrol. When the deputies arrived an hour later, I led them through the same winding path I'd taken before. But when we reached the clearing, the cabin was gone. Not collapsed, not burned, just gone, as if it had never existed. The space where it once stood was now nothing but dry leaves and old tree stumps. No footprints, no fire pit, no trace of the window or the chimney. I could barely speak, pointing to where the door had been. One of the officers gave me a long look, like he'd heard something like this before. The younger deputy just muttered, "Every few years, someone reports a cabin in these woods." The older one nodded and said, "And it's never there when we arrive." That night, back in my motel room, I couldn't sleep. Just before dawn, I got a text from an unknown number. One word: run. Unable to shake what I'd seen or not seen, I sent the scream I had recorded on my phone to a friend who worked in audio forensics. I hadn't even realized I'd captured it. But when I played the voice memo back at the motel, the sound chilled me to the core. It wasn't just a scream. There were layers to its strange distortions. My friend got back to me the next morning, voice tight over the phone. "It's not just one scream," he said. "It's two tracks. One is a woman definitely in pain. But the other's her voice too, but reversed." I didn't understand. Reversed how I asked, as in played backward. She's screaming forward and backward at the same time, like someone twisted time or reality in that moment. It shouldn't be possible, man. I sat there in silence, staring at the waveform on my laptop. Then he added, also at the end of the reversed track, "She says your name." I didn't tell anyone what he said next, but I listened again alone, slowed it down, and there it was, in a voice I now knew too well. "Don't look behind you." Still shaken by the audio analysis, I decided to dig deeper. I filed a Freedom of Information request for recent satellite imagery of the area where I'd found the cabin, hoping maybe, just maybe, it had left a trace from above. 2 weeks later, I got the files. The satellite images were in 24-hour intervals. At first, there was nothing unusual, just dense forest and a clearing. But then, in one image dated 2 days before my visit, something strange appeared. In the clearing, clear as day, was a small structure, rectangular, shadow casting, the cabin. The next image, taken 24 hours later, showed the same spot, only this time it was empty again. Trees undisturbed, no signs of collapse or movement. The structure had just vanished. I zoomed in, adjusted the contrast, and enhanced the shot. On the side of the cabin, faint but visible, was a figure, standing in the window, staring upward, at the satellite. My hands trembled as I saved the image. I showed it to a ranger I'd met during my report. He studied it, then closed the laptop slowly. "You know what's strange?" he muttered. "That's not the first time this cabin shows up for one frame and then disappears. We call it Ghost Lot 13. Locals stopped going near it decades ago." I asked him what he meant, but he just said, "Places like that don't stay still. They find who they want." That night I checked my GPS tracker from the hike. It now showed a waypoint labeled home. I never marked that. Ever since that day, our hiking group hasn't been the same. One by one, we started waking up at the same time each night, 2:17 a.m., hearing the same blood-curdling scream outside our windows, no matter where we lived. Some tried to record it, but nothing ever played back. One guy moved across the country. He still hears it. The worst part, sometimes it's not just a scream anymore. Sometimes it whispers, "Come back." I've stopped sleeping. I've stopped hiking. But last night, the scream changed. It didn't come from outside. It came from inside the house. Story 8. The Man in the Window. When my wife and I moved into the old fixer-upper in northern Maine, we thought we were chasing peace. The house sat by itself at the edge of a dense forest. No neighbors for miles, just trees and the sound of wind. After years of city noise and cramped apartments, it felt like a blessing. The place needed work, peeling paint, a creaky roof plumbing that moaned at night, but it was ours. We'd wake to birds instead of traffic, fall asleep to crickets instead of sirens. It felt like we had found something forgotten, something pure. We spent our first week painting the living room, planting herbs, and exploring the woods behind the house. There was a deep stillness to the place that we both loved, until the 7th night. That was when I first saw the shape in the window across from our bed, just a silhouette, watching, still, but gone when I turned on the light. At first, I convinced myself it was a shadow, a trick of the moonlight playing through the trees. But over the next few days, the feeling of being watched grew heavier. I'd be fixing the fence or taking out the trash, and I'd catch a flicker of movement at the tree line, a dark figure just far enough to be unclear, just still enough to unsettle me. My wife laughed it off, said I was letting the isolation get to me. Maybe she was right. But then she started locking all the windows at night without saying a word. Once while chopping wood, I looked up and saw the figure again, standing between two trees, not moving, not blinking. I called out. It vanished. That night, I asked her if she'd ever felt like someone was near the house. She paused, then said quietly, "I think someone's been watching us." From the woods. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old house made me flinch. Around 2 a.m. I got up for some water. As I walked past the hallway toward the kitchen, I caught something in the corner of my eye movement near the back porch. I froze. The porch had a wide glass door that looked out onto the woods, and standing right behind it, no more than 2 feet away, was a man. His face was pale, almost gray, like old paper, and expressionless. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and fixed on mine. He didn't knock. He didn't move. Just stared through the glass. My breath caught in my throat. I stepped back slowly and reached for my phone on the kitchen counter, never breaking eye contact. But by the time I looked back up, he was gone. No sound. No footprints on the dew-covered porch. I didn't wake my wife. I just sat in the dark, phone in hand, waiting for the sun to rise. I told myself it was a dream, a hallucination from stress and sleepless nights. But deep down, I knew better. That face was real, and something about it didn't feel entirely human. The next morning, our dog Max didn't come running to the kitchen like he always did. At first, I thought maybe he was still asleep, curled up near the fireplace. But he wasn't in the living room, or on the porch, or in the yard. I called out for him, whistled, shook his treat jar. Nothing. That dog never ignored food. My wife joined the search, and after 20 minutes of panic and calling, we both froze. Hanging from the nail beside the back door, right where we hung his leash, was Max's collar. Clean, untorn, just dangling there like someone had removed it carefully and placed it where we'd be sure to notice. My wife turned pale. She whispered he wouldn't have taken it off. Of course not. Max couldn't. He was a rescue, nervous around strangers, but loyal to the bone. He wouldn't just run off. We checked the perimeter, the woods everywhere. No paw prints, no signs of struggle, just the collar. The house felt colder after that, like something had entered our space and left a message. That night, I locked every door, every window, and placed a chair under the handle of the back door. But I still didn't sleep. The following day, while trying to distract ourselves, we decided to clean out the attic, something we'd been putting off since we moved in. Among the dusty boxes and old furniture, we found a warped photo album tucked beneath a moth-eaten quilt. It was filled with black and white pictures of the previous owners, a family of 4. The smiling parents, 2 kids, the cabin behind them. My wife flipped through page after page until she stopped, her hand trembling. "Look at this one," she said. It was a photo of the family standing right outside our kitchen window. But in the reflection of the glass, barely visible, was a shape. A man, standing just inside behind the curtain. Not blurry, not accidental. Pale skin, eyes wide open, smiling. The same face I'd seen at our window. The same face my wife had described, though she swore she only caught a glimpse. We checked the back of the photo, dated 1981, but the man in the reflection looked exactly the same. Not younger, not older, just the same. My chest tightened. That wasn't just someone watching us now. He had always been here. Maybe long before us, maybe before them too. That night, we couldn't sleep. The image of the man in the photo burned in our minds. By morning, we decided to call the local sheriff. He was kind, but clearly skeptical, attributing most of it to our new homeowner jitters. Still, he agreed to check the perimeter just to ease our minds. My wife and I waited inside, tense, jumping at every creak in the floorboards. After nearly an hour, the sheriff returned with something in his gloved hand, a small pair of binoculars, old and rusted, but intact. He found them lodged behind a bush, angled perfectly toward our bedroom window. As he turned them over, he frowned, brushing off some dirt. That's when we saw it. Carved into the underside of the binoculars in messy block letters was my wife's name, her full name, including her maiden name. The sheriff looked at us confused. "Did you drop these?" We both shook our heads. My wife looked pale, like she was about to faint. "No one here knows that name," she whispered, "not even the realtor." The sheriff didn't say much after that. He just bagged the binoculars and told us he'd file a report. But before leaving, he muttered something that made my stomach drop. "This cabin, it's had a few owners. People never stay long, but no one ever said why." That night, we nailed shut every window in the house. But even then, I swear I still felt eyes on me. Watching, waiting, closer than the glass. That same night, just past 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of floorboards creaking downstairs. I reached for my phone, dead. My wife stirred beside me, whispering, "Did you hear that?" I nodded, grabbing the bat we kept by the bed. As I stepped into the hallway, a draft swept past me from the guest room. Its door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and froze. On the wall, drawn in something dark and wet, was a message I never left. Then came a whisper from the closet, my name spoken in a voice just inches away. He was already inside. "Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.